he looked forward to the time when Israel wouldn't have to depend on this kind of thing anymore, and he regarded them as advocates not just for Israel, but on the whole for the Israeli right wing, for the more hawkish element within Israel itself. He looked for a declaration of independence by Israel from the Israeli lobby. Well, if he could put it like that, then it's the strength of the lobby is clearly not being overestimated. And my objections to Mearsheimer and Walt are twofold. One, they seem to think it's taken incredible courage of them to point this out. Well, they should try it sometime. I've been saying this in print and on the air for a long time. There's an appalling element of self-congratulation with a very slight hint to it that I do not like at all, of the suggestion, well, you know, the Jews can really take you out if they want to. There's this huge secret government that they're going up against. I don't like that tone of voice one bit, and that tone of voice is repeated, I think, in the suggestion that we are only at war with Islamic terrorism because of our relationship with Israel. That's not true. That isn't true. If we broke all relations with Israel, and if the whole of what is now Israel became part of a Palestinian state, we would still be having an extraordinarily harsh and bitter and long-run conflict with the forces of jihadism. Anyone who tries to say, if only we could just dump the Jews, we'd get out of this, is lying to themselves and lying to you, and you should be ashamed of passing that kind of stuff on.
Next call for Christopher Hitchens, Cleveland, Ohio.
Yeah, Mr. Hitchens, are you familiar with Karen Armstrong?
Slightly, yes.
I'm a big fan of hers, and there are many, many other people throughout the world who are. One of the...
I think, just let's be sure we've got the right... this is the lady who's written about the Quran and the Bible.
Do you know what? We're going to come back. Caller, Cleveland, if you'd turn down the volume on your TV so we don't get the delay. Las Cruces, New Mexico, you're on the air.
Yes, hello. Hello, Mr. Hitchens.
Hello.
I congratulate you on being the person who has confused me the longest.
Okay.
I'd like to ask you, why do you think this government has resisted and continues to resist an honest and independent investigation into 9/11? Also, what are your thoughts on Machiavelli, and do you consider yourself more of an entertainer than an intellectual, say, on the level of a Noam Chomsky? Thank you very much.
Caller, what do you think, what do you mean that 9/11 hasn't been investigated?
Well, if you remember, first of all, they weren't going to do an investigation, and then when the families of 9/11 and the wives pursued it, I believe the first person that this government put up was Henry Kissinger to lead it. And I know Mr. Hitchens has some things to say about Kissinger. I don't believe, and almost to a person, everyone I know does not believe there's been an investigation into 9/11. And also, I think it's extremely suspect that what they consider the largest attack on this country, which you could argue, seems to meet with such resistance for an investigation from a government that has nothing to hide about it.
Thank you, caller.
Well, it actually was some... I think it's thanks to me. I'm going to claim it anyway, that Henry Kissinger didn't get to do that job. And I'm bound to I would agree with you. A president who says, I'd like Henry Kissinger to chair an inquiry, is saying, I want a cover-up. There's only one possible reason that such a disgraced person who's been found to have concealed the truth about so many things, and so many disgraceful things in his life, could even be considered for such a job. I wrote a piece saying, well, in that case, quite apart from his other unsuitabilities, we'll have to have him disclose all his client list for Kissinger Associates. He can't hide behind the confidentiality agreements of that anymore. And that call got taken up by the New York Times the next day, and within a couple of days he decided he didn't want the great honor of chairing the 9/11 Commission after all. So although it was only a small point, I think I did actually pull out the thread that unpicked his appointment to that post. I'm not myself aware of anything that could be or should be known about this that hasn't been discovered. We have a rough picture of first the long time when the Al-Qaeda forces knew they were at war and we didn't. And this involves repeated failure by our establishment at every level to estimate at all the level of the threat. And we know of the unbelievable venality and incompetence of our intelligence organizations, most particularly the CIA. What's required now is a separate commission altogether one that says that our intelligence services are dysfunctional. We effectively do not have a central intelligence system anymore. And my recommendation would be to reopen Senator Moynihan's recommendation that the CIA be closed and padlocked and abolished, and we begin again, because it's better to have no intelligence service at all than one that actively works against you. We need to start the whole thing over again. Now, you had another question. Do I consider myself more of an entertainer than an intellectual? Well, I don't know which I'd want to be, but I'm pretty sure at what I'm probably better. And I'm much better at stand-up comedy and telling limericks and doing karaoke than I am at any of the other stuff. I just don't get enough opportunities.
According to the New Yorker profile from last year, you have filthy jokes that last 20 minutes.
Oh, yeah.
Cleveland, you're back on the air. Go ahead with your comment.
Yeah, you say you are familiar with Perry and Armstrong?
Yes.
Okay, History of God and other articles,
Yes.
other books. I think what I really appreciate about Karen Armstrong's books is that she's so completely objective when she looks at the history of God or religion. And the bottom line is, I don't think God is the problem. I think man is the problem. And what's so interesting when you read her books and see the parallels of earlier history, earlier religions, earlier men, countries who combined the two, how all the mistakes and tragedies came about. And bottom line, what she says and other interpretations of her writings is basically it's still the good old golden rule. And I think when you take an attitude that you take, which is so negative, you keep encouraging this us against them again. And it's not that. God is good. It depends on how you're going to, as long as you use them for good and not for bad.
Well, I disagree with you from the very first thing you said about Ms. Armstrong's objectivity. I think you're mistaking her objectivity for her willingness to take religion more or less at its face value. I've read things by her that describe stories from the Quran and the Bible as if they actually occurred, with no evidence that any of them did. You improve your argument when you say that the problem is man, because after all, God is a man-made invention. But then you contradict yourself by saying God is not bad in himself. He could be as easily good as bad. Well, he can't if he doesn't exist and if he's a human creation and a man-made object of veneration. All I'm arguing is that we'd be better off without this construct. We'd be better off without the attempt, which is really all it is, by priests and mullahs and rabbis to establish power in the real world, the only world there is or is ever going to be, by claiming that they have divine authority to do so. We have to challenge that politically by being opposed to theocracy and superstition and indoctrination. But we also have to challenge it root and branch by saying that the authority that it invokes is non-existent.
Chris Hedges, June of this year in the New Statesman. This is his review of God is Not Great. His assault on what you defines as the irrational force of religion permits Hitchens to sanction the abuse and subjugation of others. This is done in the name of his particular version of goodness, which he calls repeatedly reason. But this too is a false god, more particularly the god of death. For once you wage unprovoked wars and embrace torture, for whatever reason you unleash sadists and killers. You become no better than those you oppose. And as an apologist for the war in Iraq, Hitchens not only has the blood of American and British soldiers on his hands, but the blood of a few 100,000 Iraqis too.
Yeah, Mr. Hedges is one of the... I'm sorry, I've got a catch in my throat. I'll just get rid of it.
Sure.
Mr. Hedges is one of those rather sinister, creepy people who is a pacifist half the time. And I've already said why I think pacifism is an immoral position, because it argues for non-resistance to evil, and an apologist for terrorism the rest of the time. He drops his pacifism when bin Ladenism and jihadism comes up and say, no, you've got to understand that kind of violence, because it comes out of despair. I'm not having it listening to a bar of that song, and as you can see, he can't write and he can't argue either.
He wrote it in the New Statesman. What's the
my
New
old
Statesman?
magazine. Yeah, the New Statesman. I am sorry about this. I'm going to have some water as well.
Tell you what.
The New Statesman used to be the flagship weekly of not just the British, but in some sense the international, certainly Anglo-American, English-speaking world left. especially in the 1930s, it was